Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Let's talk about Plato's work, The Republic. The Republic, composed around 380 or 375 BC. Plato, born in 428 or 427 BC, passed away in 348 or 347 BC. Plato's The Republic is one of the most influential works in Western philosophy, where Plato discusses justice, the ideal state, education, and the nature of the human soul. The text is written as a dialogue predominantly between Socrates and several other characters, including Glaucon and the Adeimantus, Plato's brother. Through this dialogue, Plato explores how a just society can be created and what constitutes justice in both the individual and the state. Inspiration for writing. Inspiration for writing. Plato wrote the Republic in response to the political and social turbulence of Athens after the Peloponnesian War. Socrates had been sentenced to death, and the city was grappling with issues of democracy, corruption, and justice. Plato's primary concern was to define justice not just as a political concept, but as an internal state of being that should manifest both in individuals and societies. The Republic seeks to establish a clear vision of how human beings and their communities can live in harmony, achieving truth, knowledge, and justice. Themes in the Republic. Justice. The central theme of the Republic is the nature of justice. Plato attempts to define what justice is, both in an individual and in the state, and how it can be achieved. The next theme, the ideal state. Plato outlines his vision of an ideal city-state, that is, Callipolis, which is governed by philosopher kings who are wise and virtuous. The state is built on the principles of justice and order. The next theme is education. Plato emphasizes the importance of education in cultivating wisdom and virtue. He explores the ways in which people can be educated to fulfill the proper role in society, advocating for a system that promotes rational thought and moral development. The next theme, philosopher kings. A significant portion of the dialogue revolves around the idea of the philosopher king, a ruler who possesses knowledge of the forms and thus can lead society in accordance with a true justice. The next theme is the theory of forms. Central to the Republic is the theory of forms, which suggests that physical objects are mere shadows of perfect eternal forms or ideals. True knowledge, according to Plato, is knowledge of these abstract forms, particularly the form of the good. The next theme is the soul and the tripartite division. Plato introduces the idea that the human soul is composed of three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. The harmony between these parts within the individual mirrors the harmony in the ideal state. Now let's go to the structure and division-wise summary of the Republic. First of all, book first, the definition of justice. The dialogue begins with Socrates asking what justice is. Thrasymachus, a sophist, argues that justice is simply the advantage of the stronger, equating it with power and self-interest. Socrates challenges this view, arguing that rulers can make mistakes and that justice is not simply the pursuit of power. Socrates' argument begins to lay the foundation for the idea that justice must involve the harmony of different parts, both in the state and in the soul. Book second, that is, the city-state and the theory of justice. Glaucon and Arimantus challenges Socrates to prove that justice is desirable in itself, not just for the rewards it brings. In response, Socrates begins constructing the ideal city-state, that is, Callipolis, to explore justice on a larger scale. The city-state is divided into three classes: rulers, that is, philosopher kings, then barriers, that is, guardians, and producers, that is, artisans, farmers, etc. Socrates argues that justice in the state is achieved when each class performs its own function without interfering with the others. This sets the groundwork for his larger discussion of justice in the individual. Now, Book 3, that is, Education and Guardians. Socrates continues discussing the education of the rulers and the barriers. He stresses the importance of proper education to shape virtuous citizens, and in particular, the need for guardians to be trained in the physical and intellectual disciplines. The education system in Callipolis is designed to foster loyalty and strength, while also protecting the state from corruption. Plato also discusses the role of censorship in education, arguing that stories about the gods and heroes should be limited to those that promote a moral virtue. Then Book 4, that is, Justice in the State and the Soul. Socrates argues that justice exists when each class in the state performs its function in harmony. He introduces the analogy of the soul, suggesting that just as the state is divided into three parts, so too is the human soul divided into three parts: reason, spirit, and appetite. Justice in the individual is the harmony between these parts, where reason rules, spirit supports, and appetite is controlled. In this book, Plato further explores the idea that justice in the soul mirrors justice in the state, emphasizing the need for balance and a proper function. Now, Book 5, The Role of Women and the Philosopher King. In this book, Plato introduces the radical idea that women should have the same roles in society as men, including becoming rulers and barriers, provided they are equally capable. Socrates also outlines the characteristics of the philosopher king, who must possess wisdom, knowledge of the forms, and the ability to rule justly. The philosopher king is depicted as the ideal ruler, able to see the world beyond the physical realm and understand the true nature of justice. Plato argues that only such rulers can create a just society. Now, Book 6, The Philosopher King. Socrates expands on the qualities of the philosopher king, emphasizing that the true philosopher is one who seeks knowledge and truth for its own sake rather than for personal gain. He introduces the famous allegory of the sun, explaining that the philosopher king is like someone who has seen the light of the good and is capable of leading others toward truth. The philosopher king's ability to rule is derived not from power, but from knowledge of the eternal, unchanging truth. Now Book 7, The Allegory of the Cave. Plato presents one of the most famous metaphors in Western philosophy, that is the allegory of the cave. In this allegory, prisoners are chained in a cave, only able to see shadows on the wall. One prisoner escapes and discovers the outside world, symbolizing the philosopher's journey towards knowledge and enlightenment. The allegory illustrates the difference between the world of appearances and the world of forms, showing that most people live in ignorance, only seeing shadows of the truth. Book 8, that is the decline of the state. In this book, Plato describes the degeneration of the ideal state into four increasingly corrupt forms. That is democracy, that is rule of honor; oligarchy, that is rule of the rich; then democracy, that is rule of the masses; and a tyranny, that is rule of the unjust ruler. Each stage represents a moral decline in both the rulers and the citizens. Plato warns that the ideal state can only exist if rulers remain wise and virtuous, and that political decay results from the erosion of these qualities. Now Book 9, that is the tyrannical soul. Socrates further examines the soul, now focusing on the tyrannical individual who has allowed his desires to overpower reason. The tyrannical soul is marked by an inner chaos, where the appetite dominates the other parts of the soul. Socrates argues that the tyrant is the most miserable person, despite outward appearances of power and wealth. This book contrasts the just individual with the tyrannical individual, showing that the former is happier and more harmonious. Now Book 10, that is the immortality of the soul and the role of poetry. Plato concludes by discussing the immortality of the soul and the afterlife. He also critiques the role of poetry in society, arguing that it can be misleading and harmful, particularly when it represents the world of appearances rather than truth. The philosopher must avoid the seductive power of poetry, which appeals to emotions rather than reason. Plato's views on art and poetry are a central aspect of his philosophy, as he believed that they could mislead people away from the pursuit of truth. The Republic offers a comprehensive vision of a just society underpinned by Plato's theory of forms, and his understanding of justice as harmony. It represents the philosopher king as the ideal ruler whose knowledge of the forms enables him to lead society towards justice. At the same time, the Republic serves as a profound exploration of human nature, questioning the nature of truth, morality, and political authority. The work continues to be foundational in both philosophy and political theory, influencing thinkers across generations.